The very first time that I reintroduced it back at the same dose, that first time that I would take it, just pow, explosion right out the back end. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome back to another Sunday Q&A. Today's question is another question with regard to diarrhea while on the carnivore diet. Apparently you guys just can't seem to get enough of listening to me talk about dropping the Browns off at the Super Bowl, so that's going to be the question I'm answering for you guys today. But before I start, you guys know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, ding ding ding. And if you don't want to watch the entire video, I will be including timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead to the section that you want. Now on to the topic at hand. A few weeks ago I had uploaded a video about diarrhea while on the carnivore diet, and I did have a question on that video with regard to this topic. The question came from Dave the Jabroni, and Dave asks, what if you're a bodybuilder and have diarrhea and all your protein and nutrients leaks from down below? First of all, before I even answer your question, Dave, I would just like to say, with everyone that's been asking the questions with regard to diarrhea, the way that you guys phrase these questions is phenomenal, so keep them up. Anyway, that's the question that I was asked, and as you can see, we did exchange a few messages after that question, and I had asked some questions with regard to water intake, salt intake, and some other things such as supplements, and Dave also replied with, I drink 2 to 3 liters of water per day, and I eat maybe 2 to 3 grams of salt, Himalayan. I will stop with omega-3 and cod liver oil, I'll get into that a little later. I don't take acetyl L-Carnitine regularly, I take Camu and Nettle powder. MSM and zinc, I eat dairy and minced beef, all organic, maybe some eggs as well. Thank you for your reply. And then after I replied to that, I got one final question from him, and it came with regard to supplements. And Dave said, what are your thoughts on taurine, ginseng, and supplements such as selenium and chromium, as well as Camu? I used to think that used to cause the problem. Many thanks. So I'm going to break this video down into all those different categories. The first thing I want to talk about is water intake. When it comes to water intake, this could affect if you're experiencing diarrhea while on the carnivore diet. Because if you don't balance your water intake with your salt intake, your excess salt could lead to diarrhea. And I'm going to explain exactly how much water you should be consuming. Ideally, as a starting point, you would want to start with half your body weight in ounces. That is your body weight in pounds. So let's say you are a 200-pound individual. Half of 200 is 100. So if you are a 200-pound individual, you should be consuming 100 ounces of water every single day, which is roughly 3 liters of water. Now, there are certain factors that will influence how much water you should be consuming. One of them is going to be environmental factors. If it is the summer and it's really hot and humid and you are sweating a lot, then you are going to want to consume more water than the recommended amount because you are going to lose water through the process of perspiration. So if it is hot outside and you are sweating a lot, then you would want to consume more than half your body weight. This is just the guideline. Half your body weight in ounces should be a starting point. And another thing with regard to this starting point is it is going to be for the average person. If you are somebody who is morbidly obese or really overweight, let's say you're 500 or 600 pounds, you don't need to consume half your body weight in ounces because a lot of your body weight is going to be fat and you don't really need to consume as much water if you do have a very high percentage of body fat. So this is a recommendation that is made more for the general population. If you are severely overweight, then ideally you would want to equate the amount of water that you consume relative to the amount of lean mass that you are carrying. So the more lean mass that you have, you would want to go percentage based off of that as opposed to your overall weight, because that would be an insane amount of water for you to drink if you are 500 or 600 pounds. Next, some other factors that could affect your water intake would be physical factors such as physical activity. Let's say you are doing really intense training and you are sweating a lot. Again, because you are perspiring, you're going to be losing water, so you are going to want to replenish that water by adding more water to your body. The more you exercise and the more you sweat from exercise, then the more water you would want to consume. As a starting point, half your body weight in ounces, and then you would modify it from there. Everybody's going to be a little bit different based off of where you live, what the climate is, and also what type of physical activities you are doing. So you would want to modify it based off of your own surroundings and what exactly you are doing with your day. Next, I want to get into salt intake. Salt intake can definitely cause diarrhea if you are consuming too much. I've experienced this firsthand. When it comes to how much salt you should be consuming, ideally what I recommend to all my patients is that they put some salt in their drinking water. Ideally Himalayan sea salt. The reason I prefer Himalayan sea salt is because unlike bleached white table salt that's been stripped of all its companion elements, Himalayan sea salt still has its mineral content intact. Now, while Himalayan sea salt still is 98% sodium chloride, that other 2% is going to contain things like magnesium, calcium, potassium, and all those great electrolytes that your body needs to function optimally. Without the electrolytes, your body won't be able to function, so it's really important to replenish that if you're not getting them in your diet. Now, with regard to how much salt is enough, there really isn't a right or wrong answer for this one. Ideally, what you should do with your drinking water is put enough that you cannot taste it. If you put salt in your drinking water and you could taste the salt, then you've put too much, you have to back off. I have been doing this for the last 10 years. That's how I measure how much salt I need in my diet. And I stopped doing that ever since I started the carnivore diet, because when I started the carnivore diet this last time around, I kept adding more and more salt to my food. And for the first 3 weeks, it was fine. And then eventually, once I got to a certain threshold of my salt intake, I noticed that I was getting a lot of loose stool. And there was one day where I really overdid it with the salt and I was getting some pretty bad cramps and I was getting a lot of diarrhea. The next day, I cut out the salt completely, my stool went back to normal, and then I gradually introduced the salt again until I noticed that I was getting some loose stool. And then once I noticed those symptoms, then I backed off just a little bit and everything has been perfectly fine ever since. So if you are getting diarrhea and you're consuming a lot of salt, it could be due to the salt intake that you are getting diarrhea. Again though, in terms of how much salt you need, it's going to be different for everybody. You want to gauge your level of tolerance. So whatever amount of salt you are consuming, kind of keep track of it, keep a food diary, see how much you're putting on your food, and then when you notice that if you are getting to a certain threshold where you're experiencing loose stool or diarrhea, just cut it back and see if symptoms go away. If your symptoms go away and your stool goes back to normal, then it was probably just the extra salt that you were adding to your diet. Because even though salt is really important and we need it in our diet, and I encourage all my patients to put salt on their food, you have to remember that if you are doing the carnivore diet, there's already going to be a lot of sodium in the meat itself because muscle tissue contains a lot of sodium. So if you are on the carnivore diet, you do need to be a little bit cautious with that. Everybody's going to be different though. Some people can handle very high doses, other people not so much. I've heard people consume up to 30 grams of salt without any issues whatsoever. I know that for myself, if I consume between 5 to 10 grams, that is going to be my sweet spot. So that's what I try to hit. And in terms of my water consumption, I consume anywhere from 4 to 6 liters of water per day. My average water consumption is about 4 liters. The last week, I've been hitting closer to 5.5 liters, but on average, I would say anywhere from 4 to 6 liters is what I'm consuming. The more water I consume, the more salt I could get away with. If I'm not consuming quite as much water, then I can't get away with consuming as much salt. So those are some things that you could try out. Next thing that might be causing diarrhea is certain inflammatory foods. Let's say you have issues with dairy or pork or any specific issue. If you are consuming foods that are going to cause an inflammatory reaction in you, that could also lead to diarrhea. I'm going to use myself as an example. I know that with cow dairy, I do not do very well. If I have sheep, goat, or water buffalo dairy, I'm perfectly fine. So if I do consume cow dairy, I know that I'm going to have loose stool. So I avoid it whenever possible. And then if I do consume it, some days I'm like, you know what, I guess tomorrow I'm just going to have some loose stool. But generally for me, I know that if I consume cow dairy, I am going to get loose stool, which is why I stick to those other dairy sources. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the different sources that I do consume, I will include a video right over here to my personal preferences for dairy sources. Those are the ones that give me no issues with regard to GI distress. Another thing aside from dairy for me personally is certain cuts of pork. When it comes to pork, I noticed this was a few years ago. I would always consume just regular sausages. And there was one day where I went to the grocery store, they were out of regular sausages, so I picked up 4 packs of honey garlic. I'm generally not a fan of honey garlic, which is why I never get them. And this one time, I ended up consuming the honey garlic sausages, and immediately after, within 5 minutes, I went to the washroom and it just exploded right out the back end. I didn't want to jump to conclusions though, so I was doing a 5-day rotation at the time, which meant whatever food I would eat, I wouldn't eat it again for 5 days. So when it came time to the honey garlic sausages again, I ate it, same thing. Within 5 minutes, went to the washroom, and then explosion right out the back end. Did that again a third time. After the third time, the same thing happened. I realized, you know what, 100% it's the honey garlic sausages, so I stopped consuming those. But with other cuts of pork, I know that bacon doesn't affect me whatsoever. Other things like pork rinds, I love snacking on pork rinds, but I've had to stop snacking on them lately because if I consume a couple handfuls, I'm fine. But if I consume a large amount of pork rinds, that is going to give me either diarrhea or loose stool the next day. And yesterday, as an example, I'm going to give you another story about what exactly happened with me. I got home a little bit earlier than usual, and when I get home and I'm bored, I tend to snack when I'm bored, which is one of the reasons why I like to stay at work so late, because if I'm at work all day, then I don't really have time to snack on all these different things. But I got home yesterday, I ended up wanting to do something, so full disclosure, got a little bit high, and I ended up eating some pork rinds and watching a couple of horror movies. When it came to the pork rinds, I had this big 510 gram bag of the UTZ brand pork rinds. I went through half of that entire bag, and I knew that today it was going to be a bad day when I went to the washroom. And sure enough, about 10 minutes before I filmed this video, I went to the washroom and bam, explosion right out the back end one more time. So I know that for me, myself, if I consume either too much salt, too much pork rinds, or honey garlic sausages, those are all going to wreak havoc on my digestive system. Same thing with if I consume cow dairy. But those other things are going to be perfectly fine for me. For you, you want to experiment with different foods, see what exactly causes that adverse reaction. Ideally, keep a food journal. And if you could do a rotation diet, then that would be beneficial as well, because with a rotation diet, you pick a food and you stick to that food for one day, and then the next day, you go on to a different food family. So by doing that, because you are not consuming the same food for a 3 to 4 day period, then you know when you eat that food, if every time you eat that one food, it gives you some type of reaction, you know it's that food. Because if you're consuming 5 different food groups in the same day, you don't know which food group is going to be affecting you. So with a rotation diet, let's say day 1 you do poultry, day 2 you do mammals, day 3 you do fish, day 4 do something else, and then follow that for a month. Keep track of all the different foods, how they make you feel, what type of symptoms you're experiencing, and then based off of that, you can determine which foods are causing adverse reactions, which foods are good for you, and then whatever's causing an adverse reaction, just remove it from your diet and see if that helps with your diarrhea. Now I would like to get into these supplements. When it comes to the supplements, a few supplements that I have taken in the past that have given me negative reactions are going to be fish oil, magnesium, acetyl, L-Carnitine, and occasionally vitamin C and glutamine. Now, when it comes to fish oil, this year, ever since I started the carnivore diet, I pretty much got off all of my supplements because I noticed that these supplements were causing me to have loose stool and diarrhea, and ever since I eliminated them, all the issues went away. Last year, I was taking all of these different supplements, and I ended up doing an HCl protocol to fix my gut because I went for a colonoscopy, and when I did the colonoscopy, for 2 months afterwards, I was completely messed. I was just experiencing diarrhea every day. So I removed all my supplements, did my HCl protocol. Once my stomach got back to normal, I reintroduced the supplements, and I was getting diarrhea. So I ended up removing them because the second that I removed those supplements, it completely went away. One of the supplements was fish oil. Fish oil, this is a very common one that people will experience. A lot of people, if they take high doses of fish oil, they will experience some GI distress and some diarrhea. So you want to be careful with how much fish oil you are taking. In terms of how much fish oil should you take, this one is going to be like everything else. You need to experiment with yourself and test your level of tolerance. I know that for me, when I was consuming the fish oil, I was consuming 12 grams throughout the day, which is roughly 1 tablespoon. I would do half in the morning, half at night. And I used to be fine with that dosage when I was doing the paleo diet and when I was doing the keto diet. But as soon as I switched over to carnivore diet, I noticed that the fish oil would upset my stomach. So I removed the fish oil and I never had that issue again. Another one would be magnesium. And this is the same thing. Magnesium is a supplement that over the last 10 years, I've taken it for a majority of those 10 years without ever experiencing any issues. And then as soon as I eliminated it to do my HCl protocol and then reintroduced it once I did the carnivore diet, I noticed that I was experiencing diarrhea from that. So I removed the magnesium, diarrhea went away, so now I no longer take magnesium. But as with everything else, you want to gauge your level of tolerance. Some people can still take magnesium on the carnivore diet and they're not going to experience any negative side effects whatsoever. Other people will. When it comes to magnesium, in terms of dosage, again, it's going to be dependent person to person. And in terms of the type, magnesium glycinate is going to be a little bit more problematic for some people. A lot of people with magnesium glycinate, they will experience more loose stool. So if you are taking magnesium glycinate, you would want to start with a low dose. And if you are going to take a higher dose, gradually increase your dose until you find your level of tolerance. If you notice that you can take 4 pills of whatever dosage each pill is, and you experience no side effects, and then you go to 5 pills and you get loose stool, then bring it back down to 4 pills, because clearly 5 pills is too much for you, and 4 would be an adequate dose for you. I'm just using that as an example. Don't take 4 capsules of magnesium glycinate just because I said it right now. That's just an example. Start with 1, work your way up if you don't experience any side effects. And also with regard to all the supplements, don't take anything that I'm mentioning right now. You do want to get blood work to see where your levels are at. If you do have a deficiency, then you can incorporate them. But again, these are just general recommendations based off of my own experience and what I've seen in my practice. Next, I would like to get into acetyl L-Carnitine. As with the fish oil and magnesium, same thing with acetyl L-Carnitine. I have been taking this one for the last 10 years without any real issues. And then all of a sudden, once I went on carnivore and I brought the acetyl L-Carnitine back in, I started experiencing loose stool. with regard to acetyl L-Carnitine, I've done pretty high dosages in the past. I've done anywhere from 5 to 10 grams a day of acetyl L-Carnitine without any issues whatsoever. Once I went back on carnivore and went on acetyl L-Carnitine, then I did notice that I was getting some adverse effects from that, particularly the loose stool. It did give me really good energy, but for me, I would rather not have loose stool. But again, you guys could try it, try out different dosages. With all of these, start out with a very low dose if you do plan on taking a supplement, and then gradually increase it until you find your level of tolerance. If you notice that you're experiencing adverse effects, then drop the dosage back down. Again though, check your blood work, make sure your levels are fine. With acetyl L-Carnitine, this one, it's really gonna have nothing to do with blood work, but just in general, it's always good to have your blood work done. That way you know what exactly your reference ranges are and what exactly you need to do. Next, I would like to get into glutamine. With regard to glutamine, this is something that has been a staple of mine. This is something that I do currently take right now, and this is something that I take because of my ulcerative colitis diagnosis. Because I have issues with ulcerative colitis, my intestines are affected, and glutamine does help to line the intestinal wall, which is why I take it. One of the things with regard to glutamine is if you do take very, very high doses, you can experience loose stool. I ended up doing a little bit of a megadose protocol on myself. I started out with 20 grams in divided doses. I would do 4 grams 5 times a day, and then every day I would just gradually increase the dosage until I noticed I would experience adverse side effects. I got to up to 40 grams of glutamine with 0 effects. Once I got above 40 grams, then I started noticing adverse effects. So I dropped it back down to 40. At 40 grams, I was experiencing no issues for several weeks. Then after several weeks, I noticed that I was experiencing a little bit of loose stool. Now my current dosage for glutamine is 20 grams. I've been doing 20 grams for a decent portion now, and I do it in divided doses. I'll do 5 doses throughout the day of 4 grams each dose, and that causes me no issues whatsoever. I've been doing that dose now for probably 5-ish months and haven't experienced any issues whatsoever. So with glutamine, if you do get into those higher dosages, you may experience loose stool or diarrhea, but everybody's going to be different. And again, you want to gauge your level of tolerance by starting out slow, gradually building up to it, and then seeing how exactly you feel. Next, I would like to get into selenium. With regard to selenium, this one is uncommon for people to experience diarrhea, but some people will. Again, though, it is very uncommon. I don't know anybody that has experienced diarrhea from this particularly. When I say nobody, I mean nobody in my clinical practice. I'm sure people outside of the people that I work with have experienced it, but as far as all the people that I have coached, nobody has really experienced this issue. With regard to my experience, last year I was actually taking pretty high doses of selenium. I was consuming selenium in about 3 or 4 different supplements that I was taking. It was in my multivitamin, it was in my zinc and magnesium supplements, and it was also in a couple other things that I was taking. And on top of that, I was also consuming Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are a very, very high source of selenium, and if you do consume Brazil nuts, you only really need 3 Brazil nuts to hit your adequate amount. For me, I was consuming 10 a day, so last year when I went to go get my blood work done, I requested my doctor to get my selenium levels checked because I wanted to make sure that my levels weren't too high. And when I got my results, they were extremely high. The reference ranges for selenium are going to be anywhere from 60 to 150 nanograms per milliliter. That is where you should be at. When I got my blood levels checked, I was at 750 nanograms per milliliter. So I was 5 times higher than the high end of the reference range. For me though, I experienced no symptoms whatsoever with regard to diarrhea. Even though my blood levels of selenium were through the roof, no issues with loose stool, no issues with diarrhea. So for me, I never experienced any symptoms. And as a side note, it was pretty funny because when I went to show it to my doctor said, I got your selenium results, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know what this means. Your levels are really, really high. I went on Google to see what exactly it means, and you probably know more than I do because I have no idea. And I ended up, after checking out my blood work, just reducing it, so I haven't been taking the Brazil nuts since that day, and I took out all of my supplements that had selenium. But again though, for me, I didn't experience any diarrhea with that. For you, you may. It's very uncommon, but it is possible that you may experience it if you do get really high doses of selenium. Next, I would like to get into Camu. Camu, it is very high in vitamin C, and vitamin C can lead to diarrhea. So if you are taking a lot of Camu, you may experience diarrhea or loose stool because of the high vitamin C content. Now, I've never taken Camu, but I have taken vitamin C in the past. In the past, after my workouts, I used to take roughly 1 gram of vitamin C in my post-workout shakes. And I never had any issue with that. But what I did notice with regard to the vitamin C is every time I would stop taking the vitamin C for a few months, the very first time that I reintroduced it back at the same dose, that first time that I would take it, just pow, explosion right out the back end. So for me personally, I know that if I were to reintroduce vitamin C, I need to slowly build up a tolerance to it. So maybe start with half a gram, 3/4 of a gram, then 1 gram. Because if I were to take 1 gram of vitamin C right now, because I haven't been taking vitamin C in about 8 or 9 months, I know that for sure I would get loose stool and diarrhea if I were to take that. With regard to you, you may be able to get away with a higher dose, but again, gauge your level of tolerance. I know that for me, if I come off of it for a long time and reintroduce it, the very first time back of taking it, if I consume 1 gram, I'm going to experience diarrhea. So I know that for me, I can tolerate 1 gram, but not if I've been off of it for a long time. I need to build my tolerance back up, because if I were to take it today, again, I would definitely have diarrhea. If I were to take it again tomorrow, I wouldn't have it. For some reason, for me, the first day that I take it back, I always experience it, and then after that, everything's perfectly fine. Again though, experiment, see exactly what works for you. Find your minimum effective dosage. Whatever is the lowest amount that you need to feel good, that is the dosage that you should take. Just because something is good for you does not mean more is better. You want to take the minimum effective dosage of whatever supplement you are taking. Next, I would like to get into taurine and chromium. The reason I'm going to lump these two together is because these ones are both very unlikely to give you any side effects. Me personally, I never really take taurine or chromium. They have been in certain supplements that I have taken, so I have technically taken them in the past, but I've never taken them in isolation. So I can't speak from personal experience, but based off of clients that I have prescribed this to that have taken it, or based off of things that I have seen from other coaches and their experiences, with regard to taurine and chromium, it's very, very unlikely that you will experience diarrhea. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. It's possible that there's a teacup orbiting around the sun. But as far as I know, it's very, very unlikely for taurine or chromium to cause diarrhea. So if you are taking taurine or chromium, maybe it'll give you diarrhea, but as far as I know from the literature that I've read, from my personal experience, from anecdotal experience from my clients, from anecdotal experience from other coaches that have told me, then taurine and chromium, you're not really going to get diarrhea from those two supplements. Next, I would like to get into ginseng and also nettle powder. These ones, also uncommon. Me personally, I can't speak from personal experience because I never really took ginseng or nettle powder, but from what I've read and from what other coaches that I've asked about this, I haven't really seen any evidence that it will cause diarrhea. There is some evidence in the scientific literature that suggests that in a very small percentage of the population with ginseng and nettle powder that it may cause diarrhea, but it is very, very uncommon. It's not likely that if you are taking these two that these are going to be the root cause of your diarrhea. If you are experiencing diarrhea, it's more than likely going to be from one of the things that I mentioned earlier in the video. It's either going to be that your water intake is too low and your salt intake is too high, you're eating inflammatory foods, you're taking too much fish oil, magnesium, glutamine, acetyl L-Carnitine, or for some people, even high doses of vitamin C. But aside from that, I can't really see it being any of the other supplements. That's pretty much it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to make more of these Q&A videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. If you have any other questions, go ahead, ask them down in the comments section, and I will see you again tomorrow.